Good day. This is the lecture of international trade. We are now in the week 8, and this lecture will be dedicated to regional integration. As you might know, many African countries are highly excited about the new regional integration zone on the continent. So that I think it's a very timely issue to discuss the opportunities for regional integration, what are the instruments that you need to integrate, and what could be the potential impact of such a move on welfare. What we're going to do is first take a look at some basic concepts, then we'll go on to discuss trade creation and trade diversion and the rationale for regional trade agreements. One of the issues that is a constant topic in most papers dealing with regional integration is regionalism versus multilateralism. And finally, we'll draw some conclusions and take a look at the scope for further research. Let us first see what happens in the real world. I think it's always important to have a very close relationship to the real world when you discuss economics. Well, I just took some data from the website of the World Trade Organization, where they have an information system on regional trade agreements. What we can see from this table here is that 1958, in the last century, there was only one agreement among countries, and that the number of countries moving into a regional integration zone has increased a lot over the last 50 years. Yes. The current position on the 12th of October 2021 is 350 agreements in force. Yes, there are many others that are dead. Yes, they exist on paper but are not being actually filled with life. This is the same picture. We can see the cumulative number of RTAs, regional trade agreements here. So you see how the curve exploded practically over the last decades. And here you have the notifications. Yes, so countries have to inform the WTO about their moves into or their exit from a regional trade agreement, and these are the notifications here, and this is the cumulated number of agreements. As you see, the direction is clear, so many countries are seeking to join a trade agreement, and now we're going to ask the relevant questions. Why is this, and what are the potential impacts? So most of the 350 trade agreements in force today refer to goods and services. So it's 179 of 350. The rest either only to goods, 169, or to services, only 2. Examples of regional trade agreements currently in force are in the plurilateral box. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which, as you know, started in early 2021. We have the East African Community, the European Union, NAFTA, US, Mexico, Canada agreement, Mercosur. Mercosur is about Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay in South America, in Asia, yes, Asian free trade area, etc. On a bilateral level, we have the agreement between Namibia and Mozambique. We have the agreement between India and Mauritius. And South Africa, we can say that this country is a member of 8 trade agreements: the South African Customs Union, the European Free Trade Area and SACU agreements, the European Union and South African Development Community agreements, the European Union and South Africa. It's a bilateral uh, agreement with the European Union, the SADC, so the South African Development Community, where South Africa is also a member, Mercosur, SACU agreement, and UK SACU and Mozambique agreement. So South Africa appears to be very active in this area. So why do countries seek to integrate? Through regional trade agreements, a group of countries agree to enjoy freer international economic relations among themselves. And such an agreement may allow for the free movement of goods and services, and in some cases, capital and labor too. Integration agreements can be of very different kinds. We have custom unions, we have preferential trade agreements, we have free trade areas, we have common markets, and we have economic unions. So let's begin with preferential trade agreements. Well, in this case, participating countries offer reciprocal preferred treatment just by reducing tariffs and maybe other trade barriers in selected categories of goods and services only. Maybe it's only 2 or 3 goods categories, maybe it's only services. Yes, very selective. Agreements, of course, can also be non-reciprocal. It means that there is only one side giving preferences and the other side just receiving without offering something instead. Particularly when participating countries are at different stages of economic development. Free trade area, what's that? Well, member countries eliminate tariffs among themselves, big but, maintain their own external tariffs vis-à-vis non-member countries. So in order to avoid imports through the country with the lowest tariffs and re-exports to other members of the group, rules of origin are agreed upon to determine whether a good is eligible for a tariff-free treatment. So practically goods must be proved to be totally or partly grown or produced in a member country in order to be eligible. Yes, so it's an issue of domestic content. So what is the percentage of value added, for example? Yes, that must be produced in one of the member countries in order to be able to enjoy the tariff-free entry to other countries of the area. Customs union. Well, in this case, members eliminate all tariffs among themselves and in addition establish a common external tariff against non-members. So this common external tariff has to be agreed, of course, and the revenues flowing from this tariff, they either accrue to a common fund or to each member. Yes, so they can be divided. In the common fund, they can be used for common projects. Yes, for example, if a customs union wants to evolve someday into a kind of a common market, yes, then you need common institutions, you need an office, you need people working there, so this has to be paid for That is why the proceeds from a common external tariff, can be used to finance common projects. Well, if members want to go further in the process of economic integration, they may choose a common market. So in addition to the features of a of a customs union, a common market allows for the free movement of labor and capital among member countries. So you have goods, services, and factors of production. Finally, an economic union, in addition to the features of a common market, members of an economic union unify all other economic policies such as fiscal, monetary, labor, social security policies. Also, in some cases, a common currency is introduced, hopefully if the criteria for an optimal currency area are satisfied. Currently, some 350 agreements, as mentioned before, are in force, but most of them adopt the status of a free trade area, which is also easiest to negotiate. So in a world economy of more than 200 countries, on average, every country is a party to 1.75 regional trade agreements. And of course, as you can see, these agreements are not very evenly distributed across different regions of the world economy. Most of them happen among developed countries or emerging markets and developed countries. So the poorest countries of the world are not very often seen as part of a regional integration agreement. The image that emerged from these observations is that of a spaghetti bowl, yes, of preferential treatments. So what does this mean, spaghetti bowl? Spaghetti bowl, as you know, it means that the noodles are all intertwined, yes? And so if you are a producer in a country and you want to export to another country, the first thing you do is to try to find out, are there any preferences I can take advantage of? Yes. In this, of course, the more regional trade agreements come into being, the more difficult it is to work out where the advantages are. And one thing is, of course, very important in such a case where it's not very transparent what happens. You have to take care about the disadvantages. Yes. So even if you have a lot of preferences between countries, you have to take care not to get a disadvantage in your pocket. So that's the economy. The world economy shows a web of treaties and rules, and all of these treaties and rules, they have, each one of them, an impact on the allocation of global production. They have an impact on the flows of goods and services, on exports and imports. And they, of course, have an impact on migration of labor and capital. And last but not least, on the distribution of income. So that is why we need to study regional integration. We need to study international trade. So RTAs can be said to promote the exchange of goods and services among countries and to contribute to changes in welfare. By establishing a preferential agreement among a specific group of countries, however, the agreement also discriminates against non-members. Yes, that's what I was saying a minute ago about the disadvantages. Therefore, it is always necessary to study the welfare implications of an agreement with respect to both the member and the non-member country. Very important. So two of the basic concepts that we use when discussing regional integration are trade creation and trade diversion. Uh, to explain what this is about, we just assume the case of a customs union. So then trade creation is the trade created within the customs union when production in a member country is totally or partly replaced by imports from a more efficient member country in the customs union. Okay? So it's the replacement of production in one country, yes, by exports from another member country. And the assumption is that this other member country is more efficient, yes, has lower cost or maybe higher quality, something is better organized in that country. Trade diversion is the trade diverted by the currency union when imports from a non-member country are replaced by imports from a less efficient country in the customs union. So if before formation of the customs union, there was trade with third countries, yes, and this trade with third countries was very efficient, yes, so it contributed to a higher welfare of the importing country. And suddenly the customs union comes into being, and this member country is, decides to import the same goods, not anymore from third countries outside the customs union, but from another member of the customs union. And this can also be a wrong decision, yes, because maybe the other member in the currency union is not so efficient as the one outside the currency union. So these are the two things that happen, as you can see directly from the concepts, is that these concepts, trade creation and trade diversion, are rather static. Yes, they're rather static. So they don't care much about economic growth. They don't care much about migration of labor and capital between countries. Yes, and so they're not really dynamic concepts. Now, the welfare effects of trade creation and trade diversion can be seen in figures 12.1 and 12.2 in the price quantity plane on page 408 of the prescribed reading. So assume a single good in three countries, home country H, a partner country P, and the rest of the world W. H is taken to be a small country compared to P and W and faces infinitely elastic supply at prices PP and PW. The home country supply curve is QQH and DDH is its demand curve. Before H, the home country forms a currency union with P. H is assumed to have imposed an ad valorem tariff tau on imports from both P and W. Now assume P is the least cost supplier. So the price from P is lower than the price from W. So before the formation of the customs union, the domestic price of imports from P is PH equal to PP multiplied by 1 plus tau. And at this price, H produces the quantity Q0, consumes the quantity D0, and imports the quantity DQ minus Q0 from the country P, which is another country with which H is going to build a customs union. Now let H form a customs union with P. Then the price of imports from P drops to PP. Home production falls, yes, from Q0 to Q1, and consumption rises to D1, and imports from P increase to D1 minus K1, Q1. The amount of trade created by the customs union is the replacement of a part of home production by higher imports from P. Now, what are the welfare effects of this customs union? A loss in the surplus of home production, yes, because home country produces less. A loss in tariff revenue, yes, because in a customs union we have no more tariffs. But because we have lower prices, we have a gain in consumer surplus. And we get a net welfare gain represented by the areas B and D, which are both positive. Thus, a trade-creating customs union benefits the home country. The more elastic the supply and demand schedules, and the higher the tariff, the larger is the net welfare gain from the customs union for the home country. However, if W, the country W, we said that is the rest of the world, is instead the least cost supplier and not P, the customs union will be trade diverting. And this is shown in figure 12.2 on page 408. And this I would like to give you as a kind of homework. Please take a look at it and try to think about it and show that the net effect is the net welfare consists of the area B, D, minus G. And obviously, this calculation is not determinate, and please think about why it is not determinate. As seen in the discussion of trade diversion, the economic desirability of a customs union depends very much on the extent of trade diversion. That is why it's important to be able to measure empirically the extent of trade diversion. In the literature, several methods have been proposed to measure the net welfare effects of trade diversion, depending on whether the goods traded among the members and non-members of a currency union are substitutes or complements. Some of these methods to empirically estimate trade diversion you find on pages 409 to 413 of the prescribed reading. We're not going to go deeper into that in this lecture. Well, what is the rationale for regional trade agreements? The idea is that if you build a customs union with a common external tariff, a CET, then you might choose this common external tariff as an optimal tariff in the sense that the customs union reaches a maximum welfare gain. So setting an optimal CET can be analyzed as shown in figure 12.3 on page 413 of the prescribed reading. Assume two good economies. We already know H, P, and W as three countries, and we just assume that we are trading two goods and all the prices are relative prices. Yes, one good, the price of one good, good two, divided by the price of good one. So shown in the figure, the equilibrium point, lowercase a, at that point the curve XW representing the supply of good 2 from non-custom union countries crosses the curve MCU representing the combined demands of the small countries H and P for good 2. Hence the relative price of good 2 is PW, and imports from W amount to lowercase mf. Now, because XW, yes, the supply of good to from non-custom union countries is upward sloping, the marginal cost of imports of the currency union exceeds the supply price. Since at point lowercase a, the import price is lower than marginal cost, by restricting its demand for imports, the customs union reduces the relative price of imports and continues to restrict its demand until at point C, the internal price in the customs unions equals marginal cost. So what has to be done here is to restrict trade. And we do that by levying an ad valorem tariff tau that increases the price in the customs union. So the idea is to solve for the optimal tariff tau after setting the customs union's internal price equal to marginal cost. And this results in a tariff which is equal to the inverse export elasticity of supply. This is very important, please note. Therefore, it is optimal for a currency union to restrict trade if the elasticity of export supply is positive, and to do it with a tariff which is equal to the inverse export elasticity. The currency union then achieves its maximum welfare gain equal to the area higher case C minus higher case B. And the welfare loss to country higher case W is areas C and D, and the net loss in world welfare equals to B and D. This is theory. What about the empirical results? Well, if you take a look at empirical papers published, the inverse relationship between the export elasticity and the optimal customs union's tariff is confirmed by several empirical studies. What about internal economies of scale as a rationale for regional trade agreements? Do internal economies of scale strengthen the argument in favor of economic integration? This is the question. Well, in the case of economies of scale, as you might remember, we are moving into imperfect competition, which means that market structure plays a key role and custom unit members adjust their external tariffs in such a way that they're able to sustain a particular market structure after integration. So in some cases, custom union countries have increased their common external tariff just to conserve a market structure. And this shows you that governments are also sometimes interested in conserving imperfect competitive markets. One of the well-known propositions explaining the advantages and disadvantages of regional trade agreements is the Kemp 1 proposition. The Kemp 1 proposition shows us the conditions under which a set of countries may form a Pareto improving currency union. So in welfare terms, yes, Pareto. So there exists a common set of tariffs and a system of compensatory payments involving only currency union members, such that there is an associated tariff-ridden competitive equilibrium in which each individual, whether a member or not of the customs union, is not worse off and before the formation of the customs union. The proposition states that a customs union can be world pari to improving. Welfare gains arise from trade creation between customs union members while avoiding trade diversion with the rest of the world. The requirement here is to set the common external tariff so as to leave trade with the rest of the world unchanged. Yes, the same as before formation of the customs union. However, the Camp 1 proposition also requires income transfers within the customs union so that no member is worse off after the formation of the customs union. And these payments, as I mentioned before, may be financed by the revenues from the common external tariff. Well, in empirical papers, the Camp 1 hypothesis has generated mixed results, but it has been used very successfully to evaluate the consequences of Brexit. And they show that Brexit, so leaving the European Union, would actually be a good thing for the UK. Let's hope this materializes. Regionalism versus multilateralism. Regional integration begs two important questions. Would a division of the world, of the whole world, into regional blocks be expected to lead to global trade conflicts and therefore lower welfare? So the idea is if everybody joins a block, yes, and we divide the world into exact blocks, yes, would there be a kind of a trade war between the blocks? Of course, no, because many countries are member in different trade agreements. Yes, we mentioned the case of South Africa. Alone this country, only this country is a member of 8 very different trade agreements. So the division in blocks is not so is not done in such a way that you just belong to one club and you don't have any contact or only very few contacts to members of other clubs. So this is not the case. So simultaneously, a country can be member of different blocks, regional integration blocks, and the preferences agreed upon, yes, they can, of course, be very selective. Of course, you cannot be a member of several customs unions. This is not possible. Yes, so you can only be a member of one customs union. The other question that is important in relation to regionalism versus multilateralism. Do regional agreements compete with or complement the multilateral trading system personified by the World Trade Organization? Or put a little bit differently, are regional trade agreements a stumbling block or a building block for multilateral trade cooperation? Well, these are key topics, yes. And if you take a look at the literature, you will find a high number of papers. And some of them really very inspiring, but not very clear-cut results, yes. Rather, you find mixed results. The empirical results of empirical papers, they come to the conclusion that free trade is welfare superior to any other bloc formation. So if you are one of the more than 200 countries in the world and you reduce your tariffs and the rest of the world, they also do that, and everybody engages in free trade. This is said to be the welfare maximizing solution. Second, the relationship between welfare and the number of blocks is U-shaped, yes, with a minimum reached at a small number of blocks. So U-shaped. This means that a high number of blocks, yes, can be as welfare enhancing as a low number of blocks. Yes. It depends on a number of variables, and that is why the advantages and disadvantages of regional trade agreements for a specific country, for one country, always depends on the empirical results. So just to summarize, the theory of custom unions presents arguments in favor of or arguments against economic integration, but does not provide clear-cut answers. The impact of economic integration and welfare remains mostly an empirical question. The benefit or disadvantage of regional integration is an empirical question that has not yet been answered for developing countries. That is why we need much more research done from the point of view of developing countries, and I'm sure that the data that we need to do so is available nowadays. And another issue that is important is that we should not stick to estimating trade creation and trade diversion, static effects. Yes, we should try to study to link regional integration with growth and with factor mobility, and we should study these dynamic aspects. So this is what we can learn from those papers. Thank you very much.